Well,
This conference will now be recorded.
okay. Operator trouble. Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Debbie Ratliff, Adult Services Librarian at Rockbridge Regional Library. And on behalf of the library, we're pleased to host this forum for understanding better the impact of Black educators in Rockbridge County. I'm delighted for the collaboration with Eric Wilson at the Rockbridge Historical Society, all the folks at 50 Ways Rockbridge, the Rockbridge NAACP, CARE Rockbridge, the Grace Episcopal Church, and Pastor Early, who will moderate tonight, and all those who participate. Tonight's session will be recorded, and I'd like to remind you to keep your mic muted unless you're speaking. Turn it on and off by clicking the microphone icon. Red is off and green is on. If you need any assistance, just send a message in the chat function, and you can access that by clicking the speech bubble icon. Our moderator tonight is Reginald Early. He's pastor at Randolph Street United Methodist Church in Lexington. He's also the current president of Rockbridge County NAACP and the co-founder and president of CARE Rockbridge, which is Community Anti-Racism Effort. CARE Rockbridge has sponsored the annual Martin Luther King Community Commemoration for the past 5 years. Pastor Early will introduce our panelists and guide some questions. Please raise your hand when you'd like to speak. Then when he calls on you, turn on your mic to ask your question. Then please remember to turn it off again. This will help to minimize audio distortion so that everyone can hear clearly. And with that, I'll hand it over to Pastor Early.
Thank you, Debbie. Good evening, and welcome to Impact for Educators of Color in Our Community, Today and Tomorrow, Part 2. We are grateful for the library and their assistance in this collaboration. We are collaborating also with Grace Episcopal Church's Outreach Committee, Rockbridge County NAACP, 50 Ways Rockbridge, CARE Rockbridge, and the Rockbridge Historical Society. We will now have Marquita Dunn and Al Hockaday give expressions of remembrance in memory of Ted Delaney.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Marquita, and I just wanted to say that Professor Delaney, or Ted, as he was affectionately known, was a powerful and visible force in our community. He gave tirelessly his knowledge and wisdom to all. Ted always had an encouraging word for all that crossed his path. I was fortunate enough to take a year of classes and journey with him on the Freedom Ride class. He was so supportive, not only of me, but all of his students. We were blessed to have him with us. Heaven is blessed to have him back home. Ted is gone, but he will never be forgotten. His legacy lives on in his family and former students. Thank you, Ted, for all you gave us.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Al Hockaday. I enjoyed calling Ted a friend. I enjoyed calling Ted a friend because in his presence, everyone was a friend. His ability to talk to, relate to, understand just about everybody that came into his presence was actually a reward. People were literally rewarded by Ted just to be in his presence because of the way he treated people. Every person, each and every person that he laid eyes on was equal. In his opinion, every person deserved equal respect. Every person should enjoy it. If you were talking to him, his total and absolute attention. And he offered that, he gave that without exception. He was a very dear friend of mine and a very close and personal friend of Ernestine and me. And he will be missed for a very long time. Thank you.
Thank you, Marquita and Al, for those very kind and generous words of our dear departed friend, Ted Delaney. We will now have a presentation by the director of the Rockbridge Historical Society, Eric Wilson.
Are folks hearing me and seeing the screen okay?
Yes.
Good. Good to see many familiar faces and names on the screen. When we last spoke, we really centered around 1965, the moment of desegregation, as a defining context for thinking about the importance of student educational experience and teachers of color. Here, we want to move towards the contemporary context, as the panel notes. Today and tomorrow is the work at hand. And in preparing this, I've just picked up on a couple cues from our last presentation, partly about space, the place in which people do their work, and partly about what we study, how students and teachers go about their work. Many of you will have seen this. This is kind of where we ended. Class of 1965, I believe it was Marilyn Alexander who noted that there were 440 Black students in grade and high school at that moment that were variously then moved around the county. So we talked about the schools, but this is also a moment of dispersal. And in the decades that would follow, quite soon after, the question would arise how to reorganize or consolidate, as a question, the students of the county or the city or in Buena Vista. So I'm not going to go in a deep dive. There's a lot of fine print here. You could look at it later in presentation, but I do want to consider that core question, really a question of density in terms of how many people are working together or seeing one another, and the kinds of spaces, again, that they're working in. So from the late 60s into the early 70s, you can see these debates playing out. These all come from the News Gazette's files, thanks to Daryl Woodson, the current editor, who is a field reporter for many of these. Very small print, but I simply want to show the ways in which citizens then and different groups went about their work. We are here because we care about these issues. We work in these fields. We have children who study in these schools. And so on the left, you see a League of Women Voters study. This is in 1988, and a Rockbridge Education Association advocating different points of view on school consolidation. And obviously, we want to think about how would those patterns of consolidation affect racial breakdowns, class size, you can see here, geography obviously is a core component as well. But I want to put that question as a factor because it's not one we really talked about as much at the last gathering, and considering this is not an advocation, I want to make clear, for reorganizing school spaces ahead, just historical context. You can see people working through all sorts of different plans, single, dual consolidation, architects models, city agreements, county offer, right? These are the different ways in which civic bodies, community groups have weighed in. March 29th, 1989, this was news to me. It was a 30-vote margin with a 40% turnout to decide a radical fate of community schools. So it's exciting to see the civic engagement we have here. Whatever the issue that matters to you, to our community, you have the opportunity to be in that margin of vote. Ground was broken in 1990. The upcoming classes you can see here, as well as current student classes. An article about the trees that had to go to make way, but that have grown since. And then here, super small print, but to turn to curriculum, another key element, not just of who is in the building and how we're operating, but what we're doing. I want to note that every one of you who is here is invited to give input on what is being studied in Virginia schools on the history and social sciences standards that are being revised every 7 years. So we've talked in different settings about what's being taught or how it's being taught. Everyone has the capacity, students, teachers, administrators, parents, anyone who's here to look at these offerings and to weigh in through March 1st. It's not a lot of time, but still to be part of the process and to see that as part of the general work that I think we're gathered here for. Parallel to that process, a separate governor's commission to explore the teaching of African American history in Virginia. A report was published last August. You can see here 3 chairs: Dr. Marilyn Alexander at Norfolk State, Dr. Aldridge at University of Virginia, and Dr. Atkins in Charlottesville City Schools. These are the people who are shaping some of the next steps to guide students, faculty, and schools at large. This is a webinar. Several people who are in this meeting tonight participated in this to hear not only how educators, but museums and different kinds of cultural organizations. I think many of the sponsoring organizations of this group can find ways to contribute the issues, the priorities that matter them to us into this conversation as these things are implemented. Again, these will be posted on the website, but I just want people to see the ways in which culturally responsive education is being promoted here. This is not simply about data points on a line or individual figures who are in the standards. Those are important, but the practices, questions of anti-racism, recruitment, cultural climate, these are being put on the table. They're being thought through seriously and broadly and deliberately with a whole range of people across the Commonwealth. And you can see that here as well for educators and students. Some of this work is being done by our organization, by other organizations. We've done this at Lilburn Downing Middle School. We have 2 students here participating tonight who are graduates both of Downing and Rockbridge County High School. And we want to make sure that all students coming through our systems have a sense of the history and are engaged with public officials, community institutions, as a bringing that curriculum to authentic life. So with that, I will pass, I guess, back to Reverend Early to steer to our panelists this evening, and I will unshare, I think. If I stop there.
Thank you, Eric, for sharing your historical knowledge and scholarship with us, and not only with us, but with the entire community. Greatly appreciated. We will now have our panelists to speak, and they will go in this order: Byron Winchester, Hallie Klein, Marilyn Alexander, Tim Dietz, and Philip Thompson. And they have about 10 minutes each to speak. Byron, are you ready?
Yes, I am. Hello.
All right. Hello.
Hello,
Oh,
everybody. Where do I begin? I moved to Lexington since we're going to be speaking relevant to Lexington. I moved to Lexington in 2014 from Orlando, Florida. And since being here, I've gone to Lilburn Downing, then Rockbridge County High School, which I graduated in 2018. Then went to Radford for about 2.5 years, and now I'm back in Lexington. So that's kind of where I'm from. And tonight, since we're going to be discussing the diversity of our education system, when I was asked to be on this panel, I first thought about what that looks like and what that is for me. And here I don't see it. But when I lived in Florida, I had a fourth grade teacher who was a person of color. I had a history teacher who was a black man, and I had a lot of experiences that allowed me to really see the world in a different way in which I didn't see it once I moved here. And once I moved here, I was sort of put into this odd position in which I had to face things about myself that I wasn't ready to face quite yet. And because of that, I would have to sort of bottle things up in a way that wasn't necessarily presentable to how people expected me to behave. And for example, when I moved here in 2014, and the same year that I moved here, my father passed away. And the day that he passed away was the eighth grade rivalry basketball game against Pierre McClure. And I've always played basketball since I was a child, since I was like 5. And I felt dedicated to go to this game because this is what everyone knows. Everyone knows Pierre McClure. I love basketball, so I want to play with my boys. I've had a great season. We don't lose. And I haven't lived with my father for quite some time. So I don't think anybody's really going to care because they don't know who he is here. So I was like, I'm going to go to school once I found out that morning. And I was like, I'm going to play in the game because that's what he would want. He'd want me to go play in this game. So I go to school and I hold it together. I'm not crying or anything. And then I eventually pull my cousin aside who also goes to school with me. And I'm like, hey, my father passed away today. And he's like, yo, what? And I'm like, yeah, like he's gone. And he was just like, wow. And I was like, yeah, but we got this big game today. So I feel like that would be a good thing to focus on. So I'm gonna stay in school. So I go to class and I put my head down on the desk and I'm like, not trying to cry. And I'm not gonna cry here, but I'm thinking about this moment. But because I've come to peace with that moment, I'm trying not to cry. But I remember putting my head down and I overhear kids coming in and they would play this game on the board in which they would point out a country and they would list it out. And I wasn't really fond of the game because it's like 8:30 in the morning and I don't really care to point out countries on the map just to say I know where they are. But I put my head down and these kids come in and they're like, yo, Byron, wake up. Byron, wake up. And I'm like, yo, like I didn't say anything. And I'm like, yo, like in my head, I'm just like, poof, like please leave me alone. But I just kept my head down and they're like, Byron, come play the game. And I overhear someone else say he was probably up all night playing 2K or eating Wendy's. And because before I would go to basketball practice, I would usually get some Wendy's. And this was like my little thing because back when I lived in Florida, every Wednesday, my father would bring me Wendy's. And so naturally, when I moved to Virginia, I didn't even really know why I kept getting Wendy's before basketball. But this was something that I felt like it was like a big thing. But when I overheard that, it was like I was triggered. So I start bawling, I start crying, and my teacher comes, and eventually I leave. Like, long story short, I leave the school. And that's just an instance. And eventually I talked to my coach, who at the time was a black man. And he was the chief of police at the time, Al Thomas, if any of you know who he is. He comes over to my house around lunchtime and he gives me a medal. It's like this little thing and it stands for bravery. I don't have it with me right now. But he comes over and he gives me this medal. He's like, you don't need to come to the game. It's not that important. And I was like, no, I need to go. I'm going to go. I'm going to be back. I'll see you guys later. And then he's like, okay, but if like, no, don't come. And I was like, all right, I'll see you later. And so it meant a lot for this Black man to come to my house as a basketball coach and present himself in a way and present me with something within a realm of law enforcement, which is historically like white institution, something I'm like not supposed to be privy to. For him to come to my house as a man within that system and present me with something from that system and say, you represent these qualities because of the hardships that you're facing right now. That meant a lot to me. And at the time I didn't really understand it. But now as I work through these things, I understand it a little more. And so he ends up leaving, and I end up spending the day just like looking at photos, doing my thing. And I'm like, I'm going to the game. I go to the game and we win, and I'm not going to go into that. But we win. I don't really remember the game too much, but we won and we killed them, and it was a great game. But that's something that's just so that's a story. But when I left the game, I'm in the locker room and my boys, we all hug and they're crying and I'm crying. And we leave. Not going to talk about that moment either. We leave. And as we're leaving, all these like white people are just jumping. And they're like, yeah, yeah. And I've wiped my tears off and they're just like, good game, good game. And they're like touching me on my shoulders, like pushing me, hyping me up. And I remember my boys kind of like nestling me out into the bus because I was like, I'm not riding with anyone home. I want to ride the bus. But I just remember all these white people being like, we beat the other white people over here. And like at that time, like that was the way it was. It was just like, I didn't really care about this rivalry. I loved basketball. And this season was very important to me and my friends. And for us to put it together and for it to culminate in a way that meant a lot to both us and our community all together, and for it to in some ways cross boundaries and have this intersectionality component to it meant a lot. And so after that game, I was just happy. I was just happy. And I never really thought about the implications of what had happened. But afterwards, over the years, I realized I never actually took my time. And luckily, we were kind of backed up to Christmas break. Not luckily, but we were backed up to Christmas break when it all happened. And I was able to go to North Carolina and be around family for that time. But coming back, it was awkward because everyone's like, you've been gone. How's break? What'd you get for Christmas? Oh, your dad's still dead. Like, it was a lot. And, like, I'm sorry to say it like that, but that's exactly how it was. That's how people are phrasing it. And even sometimes they forget that your father's just passed away because they've never seen him because he didn't move to Virginia with you. And you've only known these kids for like 2 months. And so at this time, once I have this experience, I'm really looking for someone in my community that I can look towards, someone that can, keep me invigorated. And educationally, I needed that. And Eric Wilson, who's here, I wanted to point him out briefly before my time expires. And someone else, Miss Al Hockaday, I wanted to talk about. But Mr. Wilson, I remember distinctly a project that he gave us in which we were to design our own school and what that would look like for us. And when I did that, I felt as though I was internalizing all the things that my educators weren't offering in terms of mental health, in terms of the information and how the curriculum was actually applying to the things that were occurring in my life. But because Mr. Wilson presented this project in such a way that it was open to whatever I wanted to put, it really gave me a lot of power in that way. And so to conclude on that point and how that ties to my education and just all that I was experiencing that year, for once an educator wasn't trying to teach me curriculum, they were trying to do something that a lot of educators, and not a lot of the ones I've had, but some miss, is that you need information and emotion to create long-term memory. And you have so many kids who get curriculum and it's information, but there's no emotion to it unless it's anxiety because you're cramming for a test or whatever it is. But there's no true, sincere emotion attached to the information in which you're learning. And so I point out that assignment because Mr. Wilson presented it in a way because I could put my emotion into it, as well as the information that he was presenting, knowing his curriculum, knowing as an English teacher what he has been working to do. Fast forward, also looking for people into the community. I look towards Al Hockaday if everyone knows who Al Akade is, there's too much to be said. But I ran into him by accident, and he gave me a job, and I'm going to leave on this quick story. Sorry to run over, but I'm going to hand out ads for my school journalism program, because my school journalism program was hosting the talent show, and I go downtown and I'm asking for ads, and I run into the Shenandoah attic, and as soon as I go in, I'm walking around and ask Mr. Hockaday, like, hey, can I have a candle or something? We can spark up a conversation. He's like, do you have a job? And I say, no, I do not. He's like, well, you come back as soon as you finish your talent show and we'll get it going. And so I leave to say that because my school connected me to someone within the community that looked like me and resembled some of the qualities I wanted to see in myself as I can continue to grow. And so those are the two stories I wanted to share, or three stories, or however many. But thank you so much for allowing me to have this space and this time.
You're quite welcome. Thank you so much
you.
for that sharing, Byron. Now we'll hear from Hallie.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Great. So yes, thank you so much, first of all, for inviting me to be a part of this event tonight. Before I start, I really just want to thank Byron for everything he shared just now, because I know a lot of that was probably very emotional. And also just want to acknowledge that I don't think there's really anything I could share that would be as meaningful as the things that Byron just spoke to. So I would just encourage everyone who's listening to this right now to really reflect on what Byron said and how that applies to yourself. And I say that as much for my own benefit as for everyone else. So I guess I'll just give a little bit of my backstory and of my education experience here, and then tie that to the topic of race. So I moved to Lexington in 2005 from Cleveland, Ohio. So I attended kindergarten in Cleveland, and then my first through 12th grade years were here in Lexington. And then I attended Lexington City Schools up until high school, and then Rockbridge County High School, so county schools for the last 4 years. And then I'm currently a student at UVA in my 4th year, actually studying to be a teacher. So next year I'll be finishing off my education at UVA for grad school. So yeah, I would say that the absence of educators of color in Rockbridge County was definitely something that was notable to me, specifically because I had the same number of Black educators, for example, in 12 years of schooling in Lexington as I had in 1 year in Cleveland, which was 1 in both cases. And so in Lexington, that educator was Mr. Young, who I'm sure many of the younger people here have had. He may have been the only Black educator for a lot of people on this call and a lot of my peers, I would say. And so he was my 7th grade civics teacher. He also taught PE when I was in 6th grade, so that was a brief thing that he did. But I still remember the very unique and positive impact that he had on my learning. What I remember most about being in his class are the stories that he shared about his own life and the way that he connected the course content to his own experience of growing up Black in the United States. So I think this was especially impactful in a civics class because for the first time, whether we knew it or not, I would say that my classmates and I were learning how to look more critically at the history of the United States and its institutions by, in this case, seeing the way that they were shaping the life of our very own teacher, who was able to share stories from his own personal experience. And so I feel like this theme of critical thinking is a very significant part of why it's so important to learn from a diverse set of educators, because hearing these distinct perspectives of educators of color can maybe enable students to then question the other dominant narratives that they're seeing in literature or in history or in other parts of their everyday lives, and maybe start to ask who has been actively excluded from those narratives and why, in a way that would be, I would, less impactful if only learning from white educators and, you know, all of your 13 years of schooling. So today, when I look back on all of my years of education in Rockbridge County, especially after actually learning from many educators of color at UVA. All of them have been truly some of my favorite professors at UVA. When I think back about what was missing from my education experience besides educators of color themselves, what also stands out to me is the near absence of learning about people of color histories or about race and racism. I was talking to someone recently about this topic and realized that the main times that I personally recall any sort of in-depth or substantial learning about race and racism, it was part of some kind of project where students could choose their topic or what book they wanted to read, so we could largely opt in and out of this learning. So for example, could opt in and out of reading books by authors of color, or opt in and out of doing projects on topics, related to race and racism. And it wasn't framed in this way, but that was sort of the effect of it. And so these projects, like my independent study senior year, or a paper that I wrote junior year about the Harlem Renaissance, are still some of the most meaningful experiences that I had in all of my years of K through 12 education. But so many students will not be sharing these experiences from year to year. And learning about race or reading texts written by writers of color is something that students, especially white students, shouldn't be able to opt out of. This should be part of all of our learning, all of our knowledge. And so I've often wondered, how this pattern might relate to the absence of educators of color in our schools, and feel as though that's something worth seriously reflecting on. Like, would things be different if there were more teachers of color? Would we be learning more diverse stories and histories? And so moving forward, I really just want to emphasize that hiring educators of color is not enough on its own. There's so much more that needs to be done in Rockbridge County specifically to especially ensure that educators of color feel safe and supported once they enter into these schools. But I also feel like it's important to note that this is also not sort of like an easy excuse to sort of throw up our hands and say, well, things are just too complicated here. There's not anything that can be done, because I feel like there's really always more that we can be doing. I would specifically say to myself and to the other white people who are here listening tonight that we really need to listen to what people of color in this community have been saying about their experiences in Rockbridge County and in the schools here, and act according to those stories and experiences, because many of the problems that exist here, I think, have already been diagnosed by people of color in this town who've spoken on their experience and what they see as needing to change. And so I just wanted to sort of put that out there at the end, that in terms of action moving forward, that a lot of the materials that we would need are already here, because people in the community have spoken, people of color in the community have spoken about how it has impacted their life to not have educators of color, and what kinds of things they think would need to change about the school system in order for that to take place. So that's sort of the gist of what I wanted to share. Thank you again for inviting me.
And thank you so much for coming, Hallie. That was an excellent, excellent presentation. Very, very on point. And we really appreciate that. We will continue with hearing from Marilyn Alexander, following Marilyn, Tim Diet, and then Philip Thompson. Marilyn, are you there?
Here I am. I had to unmute.
Thank
Good
you.
evening, everybody. I first of all want to thank all the individuals, the groups that are represented here, who came to the realization that our community will be better stronger by having this series of conversations about the inequities in public education in our community. We have come a long way. We actually have, but we have much farther to go and a lot of work to do. And most of you probably know me already and know I was born and raised here in Lexington on Green Hill on Massey Street. I attended the Alice Moore Nursery School in her home on Cincinnati Lane as one of 3 graduates of her first class, having opened the school so that Black children in the neighborhood were well prepared academically to enter public school. Alice Morrison Moore was instrumental in enhancing the educational foundation for so many of us, and we are forever grateful to her. I attended the segregated Lilburn Downey School through the 7th grade, and by default, when schools totally integrated by my 8th grade year, Lexington High School didn't have room for our class. So we went back to Lilburn for the 8th grade year. But upon completion of high school at Lexington High School, I attended Virginia State University, a historically Black college university in Petersburg, Virginia, where I graduated. After that, I went to work for the Virginia Employment Commission for over 20 years and commuting most of those years, but came home getting work here so that I could be near my family, my aging father, and our growing children. Fast forward, during those years, I was able to return home to work to my community where I was no longer just here on nights and weekends, but I was finally able to be active in the community, and I began that with the school board. I started my years with the schools on a committee charged with developing the student tuition payment policy, allowing non-resident students to attend city schools, a policy that I'm sure many of you are aware of today. And then upon completion of that assignment, I got the bug. And it was suggested to me to go ahead and consider being appointed to a seat on the school board. But that was in 1998, a long time ago. Now, by that time, most of the Black teachers had retired. Charlotte Alexander was still at Waddell, along with Nadine Craney, a paraprofessional, and Leona Fontaine was the office secretary at Lilburn. I do want to strongly convey this, that in my 10 years on the school board, that Lexington was fortunate to have had as many dedicated superintendents and school board members dedicated to the students, the staff, and parents alike. I first served with Dr. Nick Maskell until his retirement. Then Dr. Dan Lyons followed him. Now, you might recognize some of the names of my fellow board members, such as Jack Page, James Geary, Kirk Luter, Jim Hintz, Mayor Frank Friedman, Natalie Jarvis, Aaron Bruce, Leslie Strawn, Lisa Solot, Rich Hastings, just to name a few. You probably recognize those names. And in 1998, when I started, Dr. Maskell was already engaged in the same goal that the school board had, to recruit teachers of color. I traveled with Dr. Maskell to recruit occasionally as he visited job fairs and HBCUs. However, we realized on one of our visits, that unless something as simple as our portfolio covers were changed to remove a photo of the statue of Stonewall Jackson, we were doomed from the beginning. Eventually, that was changed and used for recruitment of materials, recruitment materials going off to colleges and universities. Now, even though over the years the system later gained one teacher and a few paraprofessionals, interest from more potential Black teachers was practically non-existent. However, it was always a topic of concern, no matter who our superintendent was and no matter who was on our board. Although we were not successful in recruitment during those years, we placed a great emphasis on those things that we could make happen. We placed an emphasis on Black history. Number one, the schools included Black history topics across the curriculum. And I want to emphasize this. don't ever think that your voice is not going to be heard. One year while I was serving as chairman, one of the things that we are responsible for is helping to develop the school calendar coordinated with the county school calendar. And I was in the school board office one day when we were working on it, and this was when the Martin Luther King's holiday had become a national holiday by that time. So I simply said, why can't we consider adding Dr. King's holiday to our school calendar the next school year? It was that simple. We presented the idea to our board where it was overwhelmingly approved, and that was such a proud moment for all of us on our board. Then later, we tried to develop a program called Grow Your Own, an idea to find a local graduating senior interested in returning to Lexington to teach in exchange for some assistance with college tuition. Now, in casual conversations with some of the potential high school seniors, none of them were ever interested in considering returning to Lexington. So that program really didn't ever get off the ground to the point of us requesting funds in the budget. We continue to have this problem that once our Black students leave Lexington, rarely do they return to stay after they get out of college. Emphasis was also placed on the Black community, and I'll explain that. When our board focused on renovating Waddell and Lilburn, all the pros and cons were on the table. We determined that closing Lilburn would be a devastating event to the heart of the Black community. But by renovating it, would not only improve the learning environment for all of our students, but it would also enhance the viability of an aging neighborhood where it's located. In now the process of thinking outside of the box in our brainstorming sessions, the idea of building a school in Richardson Park was suggested. Well, I could have been knocked over with a feather when I heard that one. Even though it was intended as harmless, very harmless, I knew that we as a board and a school division would suffer greatly if there was even an inkling that this was mentioned as a serious idea, let alone having it be considered. Thankfully, I and the rest of us somehow survived those brainstorming sessions, and you see Lilburn the way that it is today. But what we did do at that time, though, is we prepared to move forward with our renovation plans, and we brought our plans to the neighborhood to engage the residents who lived here and have them be part of the process. Many of them, which were alumni of the school, so of course they were very proud to take part and take some ownership in the process. You could see the excitement on their faces, a lot of older ladies, older gentlemen, when the idea of the Heritage Room was presented to them. A room dedicated to Lilburn Downing High School collections for alumni documents, or yearbooks, pictures, materials, what have you. And it's available for touring today as arranged by the school board office if anyone's ever interested. Now, even though our school division has fallen short on recruitment, there are so many other progressive moves made to enhance our school environment, not only for all of our students, but for our neighborhoods. But with all of that being said, I must say this: we have got to continue our quest to resolve the wider systemic issues in the greater community here, to soften the landing for a successful recruitment process. And I'm speaking of affordable housing commensurate with the teachers' salaries, additional job opportunities for the spouses of those teachers, ensuring a safe community for any new residents. And I'm not talking about crime so much. I'm talking more so about those symbols of racism that are part of our local fabric right now. Those are immediate deterrents to some visitors as well as potential residents. In addition, being more inclusive minded when planning community events, and being openly friendly, and overall being the truly welcoming community that we may feel that we are. And we tend to be just that from 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. But like 11 o'clock in the morning on Sunday mornings, all over this country, the division is a gaping hole. And then again, as I said from the beginning, we have a lot of work to do to close that gap. Thank you.
Thank you, Marilyn. You raised some interesting points, and we appreciate your doing that. Tim?
Sure. Thank you so much. So my name's Tim Diet. Thank you so much for having me and letting me join and represent Lexington City Schools. I come here with a couple different things. So one, certainly currently serving as school board, but also I teach at Washington and Lee, where I'm a professor of economics. But a little bit unusual maybe within economics, my dissertation was actually looking at inequitable access to advanced curriculum in North Carolina public schools, particularly focused on children from families whose parents had not gone to college, as well as African American children, and so seeing disparities there. So it's certainly something that I've been studying in my day job, as well as interested in as a citizen. So and in addition to working with economics department, affiliate member of the Africana Studies program, the Shepherd program, as well as education studies. So with that out of the way, I mean, I do want to thank you all for organizing this. I attended the first panel, which was fantastic. And it's just a really wonderful to see the turnout and the interest in these issues, in our community. I think Marilyn highlights that, her comments really highlight how much these issues, how much they feel the same, frankly, which can be frustrating. And I think, the two former students, Haley and Byron, I apologize if I got names wrong, just really shed important insights, into this work, and just incredibly valuable. And talking, for example, Haley talking about the notion of belonging and how important that is. We can't just stop at hiring, even if we are successful with that. It's about having a welcoming community, making sure that's for all students, thinking about it from a curriculum standpoint. And, and as Marilyn highlighted, it's about the whole community, right? Hiring is not simply about a job and that simple task. On my, I'll say a couple comments just from my teaching background and the courses I've taught. One is that, the overall statistics nationally really bear out how important of an issue this is. We see nationally, and I know some other events put on by these groups have highlighted that, the importance of children benefiting from seeing, themselves in who's teaching them at least some point in their education, and how that clearly has a documented positive impact. And so it is of pressing importance that, that we do all we can, to increase the diversity of our workforce, because it really matters, for our kids. And then as highlighted, it really is incredibly challenging to do. So, we've been trying to do it for many years. That doesn't, mean that we can't stop trying. We need to keep going and working on that. I mean, the location challenge is really tremendous. Certainly when we look at the overall literature, the vast majority of teachers locate back close to where they grew up after college. So to hear Marilyn talk about the notion of the grow your own is sort of the same sentiment that I would have. And I'm like, oh well, we were going to try that and face challenges. So trying to learn from what we've done in the past is also really important. Certainly in the past, we didn't have the Irma Thompson Educators of Color Initiative, and I think that can, hopefully be helpful. In terms of current steps from the school board angle, on the recruiting front, we have been, I know that Rebecca Walters, she's on the call, and so is Tammy Dunn, another school board member. and they could answer additional questions, I'm sure. But we've reached out to all the HBCUs this year, including both by email and following up with a hard letter, as well as the flyers that were put together by the Rockbridge NAACP, CARE, and 50 Ways Rockbridge, as well as and in that letter, information on the Irma Thompson Educators of Color initiative to really try to to signal, that this is something we really care about. We're not trying to do just sort of check a box and say, oh, we did that and that's fine, right? But we really have to show it. As Marilyn highlights, there are real challenges because all these different little signals matter when it comes to hiring. And so if they're getting some other signals about our community that are less welcoming, well, that's working against us, as well as not something we actually want to have in our community. So that's a real challenge. Other things that they'll be doing is attending the virtual jobs fair at Virginia State and Hampton University. Again, really trying to work. Frankly, as we've talked about at school board meetings, one of the challenges is often knowing, being able to recruit earlier, right? It was often something that's talked about. And as a small school district, there are real challenges with that we often don't know whether we'll have any openings in a given year. We are able to recruit right now because we do have one elementary school position open, as well as 2 paraprofessional positions. But it's simply really challenging. And on the broader, to the notion of belonging and really thinking holistically, we do have a newly formed division equity team that was created last summer. That really is trying to look and think about, well, what are all of the different ways in which we need to keep this, front of mind, and where are we not thinking about, whether it be, having all people sort of represented within our history courses or curriculum, implicit bias, right? And so it's wonderful to see that our school, it sounds like it historically has taken it seriously, and now is really trying to push forward on that, as far as a collaborative effort with, within that equity team, our community members, parents, former students, current teachers, because it just needs to stay front of mind, right? So that we really understand, okay, are African-American students being represented in the curriculum? Well, who are the author choices, right? All the sorts of things that we're talking about. And we have, another, we'll say, highlight of in the last year, through some of the challenging issues we've dealt with, was highlighting a lot of the work that is going on and a lot of the good work that is of teachers such as Eric Wilson, and how the curriculum they're going through. As a personal side story, it was great to after the inauguration, I asked my son, is home virtual, of course, schooling, and I asked what he thought. He was like, oh, that was great. And I remember reading Amanda Gorman last year in 8th grade, and so I was like, oh, that's good, just as a little tidbit that of what he's seeing. And I'll just sum up with, there are definitely real challenges. I mean, when we look at recruiting teachers, we average around 4 or 5 applications. So it's challenging to recruit teachers, period. And it's even harder to recruit teachers of color, frankly. And so it's about being very, very intentional at every stage in the process. And so, yes, that involves the job fairs and all of that, but it is, trying to build, longer term relationships, continuing to rely, frankly, on all of you to, to think creatively about how we can build networks, to get sort of informal contacts, and as well as sort of the formal contacts within schools to be able to be, successful, frankly, in recruiting. Happy to talk more and take your questions, but frankly, I know all the other speakers have been a lot more valuable and shared more insights than I have. So I'll pass the virtual microphone.
Thank you so much. That was good information, and we appreciate your sharing that with us. And we know that it is a challenge, but I know the school board is up to the challenge. Nothing worthwhile achieving is easy. So just want to encourage the school board to step up to the plate to meet the challenge. Thank you so much. Dr. Thompson?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. My name is Phil Thompson. just in case those of you who may not know, I do serve as a division superintendent of Rockbridge County Public Schools. I'd like to thank all the many organizations who came together to host this extremely important event. I very much enjoyed listening a couple of weeks ago to part one, and I'm honored to be asked to participate tonight. So thank you all very much. You know, like I'm not originally from Rockbridge County. I consider myself a native, but like so many folks who live in our community, I was brought here because of one of our local institutions of higher learning. My father was a military career veteran, and VMI brought him here when I was 4 years old. And like so many others who come to Rockbridge County through whether Washington, we chose to stay and we never left. So at 4 years old, as I said, I consider myself a native, even though some folks in Rockbridge County certainly still do not consider me a native. As a result of being here that young, I'm a product of Rockbridge County Public Schools. I started elementary school in Central Elementary, finished at Fairfield, went to Brownsburg Middle School, and like Mr. Stanley Land, who shared his story during part one, I attended Rockbridge High School in Fairfield, the original Rockbridge. My graduating class had approximately 62 students in it. And looking back, I was trying to remember, of those 62 students in my graduating class, I can remember, I think, 2 students of color. Obviously not a high percentage. This was in the late 80s at this point. With respect to my childhood growing up, having grown up in Fairfield, I grew up in a loving, very modest home. And I can honestly look back now and say that although I didn't realize it at the time, I was pretty isolated in that small community there in Fairfield. Getting away from the county, whether it be for just regular trips or vacations, whatever it may be, was extremely rare for my family. And even a trip to Natural Bridge outside of athletics. I played sports in high school, but outside of athletics, going to Natural Bridge at the other end of the county was pretty unheard of during those formidable teenage years. And so, you know, it was just one of those things that when you didn't have a whole lot of money, it's just the way it worked. And I stayed in the northern part of Rockbridge County the vast majority of my youth. And so once I was able to graduate high school, and I did relatively well in high school, I had to borrow a lot of money to go off to college in Harrisonburg. And it didn't take me long to realize that the world was much larger and more diverse than the community I had grown up in. I remember very distinctly, it was about 2 weeks after I'd gotten to college. I was in the gymnasium and we were playing basketball, and there was a group of kids there, and the conversations that were happening, it was just different from what I had grown up with. And I will say, first of all, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that my eyes were open to necessarily a better world in Harrisonburg, because not everything was certainly better. But I did realize that there were certainly different perspectives, different viewpoints on many life topics, if you will, beyond those which I had grown accustomed to as a teenager. So that was pretty unique for me. And I say unique, I think that happens to most folks when they move away from home. They get out into the real world a little bit, and they realize not everything is like where I grew up. So since those first years of college, while there will always be room for further growth, I've been extremely fortunate. I've had many life experiences that have allowed me to see a lot of the world and learn to appreciate it for its diverse cultures and the people, different types of people all across the globe. But you know, from my own time in the armed services, I was some postgraduate experiences I had as a public educator. I've worked in different school divisions, and certainly personal travels. There's no doubt I've been pretty blessed to meet and learn from different cultures, religions, and so on. I was very fortunate in 2007, after seeking some professional growth and serving in some other school divisions. I was honored to be offered the principalship at Maury River Middle School. And you know, it's in Lexington City, but it is a Rockbridge County middle school. And at the time I was hired, we had 2 employees of color within the school at that time. And while I was certainly proud to be named principal and lead such a wonderful faculty at Maury River, and I remember being a bit surprised about the overall lack of diversity among our faculty. And over my 7 years at Maury River, I spent 7 years there as principal. Of those 2 employees I mentioned, you know, one resigned a few years later for family reasons, and that happens from time to time. and one retired following a long and successful career, well over 30 years in Rockbridge County Public Schools as a classroom teacher. So it was pretty obvious from that perspective and my lens of being a principal in one school that diversity, we needed some help. We needed to do some things to make that a little bit better. Then I moved to central office, and when I came to central office as our division assistant superintendent, I was able to view the school division from an entirely different lens, and looking across all of our schools, it was easy to see once again that we lack diversity with respect to employees of color everywhere. There just were not a lot of certainly professional, whether teachers, administrators, those types of positions. There were not a lot of employees of color filling those positions at that time. There were a few, of course, there were a few. However, they have continued since then to retire and move on to the next chapters of their lives after education. So, later on, and again, in my role as assistant superintendent, there was a time where I had a pretty active hand in the hiring of personnel for a few years at least. And while we recognized the need for more diversity among our faculty and staff members over the course of the past 6 years, as I was thinking about this panel and different topics that I wanted to bring up and mention, over the past 6 years, I have to say that I have only had the opportunity to interview a grand total of 3 applicants of color that have come through our doors. And some of the challenges have already been mentioned tonight about why it's difficult to gain those types of candidates, those candidates of color in Rockbridge County and Lexington. And I don't think it's a huge secret about some of the challenges that exist here in Rockbridge County when it comes to recruiting young educators of any color, for that matter. I've heard many, whether it be white, black, Asian, all backgrounds, simply say that there's not a lot for young college graduates to do in Rockbridge County. And we've lost many wonderful educators who relocate to Northern Virginia or other areas where different activities may exist that appeal to young professionals. So some of those things that Marilyn was talking about with respect to things we need to do systemically outside in the community to make it more of a welcoming environment for people of color, I think is spot on. During the recruitment process and while attending recruitment fairs, I've had candidates of color who have been very frank with me when I've talked to them about trying to come to work at Rockbridge County Public Schools, and they just look at me and they say, look, there aren't a lot of people who look like me in Rockbridge County. That's happened twice over the last 6 years, and that very statement or something along those lines is basically what they said. So it's difficult whether you're trying to recruit someone. It happened to me once when I actually offered a job to a candidate of color, and that very along those same lines was mentioned to me as well. There just aren't a lot of people of color here. After they had some chance to think about it, they called me in a couple of days and said, I appreciate the offer, but I'm going to go somewhere else. And so obviously there's no question that that's disappointing at best to hear those types of things about our community and not being able to support those, especially those young educators, young professionals, and certainly educators of color as well. And so we started noticing those trends, and we began to look more broadly as to what was happening around, certainly around the Commonwealth. And we found, and again, no real secret here, that the data is out there, but we found over the last decade enrollment in teacher training programs. I'm talking about when you go to JMU and Virginia Tech, Radford, or HBCUs, wherever it may be. Teacher training programs have the folks who are looking to get into those have decreased by 35% over the last decade. That's well over a third of folks who are looking to get into the teaching field. And that's all races, all backgrounds. And during that same time, fewer people seeking to become teachers. Current teachers who are already in the profession were leaving the field at over 8% annually. And the attrition rates for new teachers were even higher. It's a difficult job. It's tough. There's no doubt. But those types of numbers shouldn't be. And we obviously need to do better to try and figure out ways to get folks into the teaching profession, and certainly more educators of color into the teaching profession in our area as well. So with those sorts of statistics and current teachers of color only making up around 21% of the teachers in the Commonwealth, these challenges are significant. So it's one of those things where you look back and you try to think about the challenges that are there, and as Dr. Hurley said momentarily ago, I think we're up to the challenge, and we've started a process much like the Lexington City School Board and Lexington City School Division, trying to do some different things. And even with these challenges, I and our school board have recognized that the things that we can control, while they may be limited to some degree, we also agree that hiring more educators of color certainly would be a positive step that would benefit all students across Rockbridge County, no matter what color the students may be. So with this in mind, over the past school year, our school division has reaffirmed our commitment to recruiting, retaining qualified candidates, which is huge, trying to keep them here once we get them here. Certainly, all of these play into the same hand with respect to finding candidates of color for professional positions in our division. We have some employees of color in our school division now. We only have one that's in a professional position in our school division. That's it's pretty disturbing, to be honest with you. So I'm proud to say that in working with the Rockbridge chapter of the NAACP, we are in agreement that this initiative requires attention and determined effort on our part, and we have instituted concrete steps to address this concern. And as I said, just over the last year, our school division has committed to several things, one of which attending more job fairs, specifically at historically Black colleges and universities. HBCUs has been mentioned tonight. Some of those job fairs are at Virginia State, the Teacher of Color Recruitment Fair, and at the Diversity in Ed Recruitment Fair. We've joined other web-based platforms and to allow us to post jobs and make career connections with students and graduates of colleges throughout the region, including HBCUs. We're actively sharing the Rockbridge area NAACP Irma Thompson grant scholarship with potential candidates of color. We're taking brochures with us when we're able to go out in person once again, to be able to have an in-person job fair where we can see folks face to face. We've got those brochures with us about the Irma Thompson grant scholarship. And that's a wonderful opportunity for potential employees of color that could benefit them if they choose to come to our area. So we're happy to partner with them in that. We've recently placed a statement on our job board website welcoming diversity in our candidates. That's something was something we just did not have on our website in the past. I think we took it for granted, but we've added that recently. We invited Dr. Charles Barrett to serve as our keynote speaker this year to speak on issues of diversity, social justice, and childhood trauma. We're also moving through a division-wide study of his book. It's called Always About the Children. Under the leadership of the Director of K-12 Curriculum and Instruction, Mr. Tim Martino, and our supervisors of special education, our school division is leading an equity initiative also, which is focused on providing equitable opportunities in all areas, it's important that we do all areas here. We're talking about K-12 educational, talking about curriculum, we're talking about personnel, we're talking about all functions that are wrapped around the K-12 educational process. We've registered for participation in a series sponsored by the Department of Education Leadership at Virginia State University. It's entitled Equity in Education, and we've sent teams to the Education Equity Summer Institute, sponsored by the Virginia Department of Education. All of these items I've mentioned are either a work in progress or have been achieved within the past year. We've made a commitment to our community, and we understand that we need to make sure we are highly valuing and showing that we are highly valuing diversity, and we wish to see it grow within our school division. So in closing, I'll just say, look, it is our hope that soon we're able to realize our shared goal of increasing diversity in our professional staff, to provide greater opportunities for qualified professionals of color, and to enhance educational opportunities for all of our students, because we fully recognize that when we have a diverse faculty, we have diverse members of our employees, it's better for all kids. It's I think Haley was mentioning earlier, you get different types of stories and different types of histories, and it's a more broad educational experience when you can have that type of diversity in your educational faculty and staff. So again, I'll close with that, and happy to try and answer any questions you all may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Thompson, for that information, that sharing, and the plans that the school district has as it relates to hiring educators of color in the school district. We really appreciate the fact that you have gone on record to and spelled out some of the plans that you have to realize the goal of making diversity a keen and important issue, and realizing that issue of hiring more educators of color. Greatly appreciated. We now have an opportunity to ask questions of our panelists. You can write your question or feedback or observation in the chat. And we have somebody who is monitoring the chat in the person of Anna Crockett. So, any questions? Or you can raise your hand, and if I see you, I will call on you.
We have two questions in the chat. One is from Oshani, who asked, how many of the 3 were hired? I believe that's a reference to Dr. Thompson's report of having only 3 applicants of color in recent years. So her question is, how many of those 3 were hired?
Sure, we were able to hire one of the 3.
1/3. And next question is from Tuck. His question is, has the system tried to recruit a Black principal or other administrator?
Is this addressed to Rockbridge County?
Probably to both, I would think, to representatives of both the county school and the Lexington schools.
I will say, and I'll allow obviously someone from Lexington City to jump in as well. I think I'll certainly speak for Rockbridge County. We're always recruiting any qualified candidates, no matter what color or race they may be, whatever their background may be. Certainly, we would welcome more candidates. As I mentioned, only having 3 that I've been able to interview in the last 6 years is not good. So by doing things differently with respect to our recruiting efforts, with trying to let folks know that we are welcoming and want a more diverse faculty and staff. Those are the types of candidates we certainly are looking for. But at the end of the day, as I've said many times, I want to make sure that that no matter who we hire, loves kids first and foremost. We want them to have the heart. We want them to be nurturing and all those things that come along with making kids feel good. I wrote down something when Byron was talking about, I forget which teacher he mentioned, and I apologize, Byron, but the fact that he remembered a teacher reaching out to him and talking to him in a certain way and helping him out. And kids don't remember. They don't remember tests. They don't remember the homework they do, but they remember how teachers treat them. So, from that perspective, we need more diversity to make sure that we have more teachers who look like our student body. And I think it'll be a little bit easier for them to reach out and make those connections that are extremely positive and meaningful for our students. So that's a long answer to a short answer of course, we would welcome those candidates of color anytime.
I'll add from the Lexington school, city school side that, yeah, in all of the recent hires that we've done, from superintendent and recent principal hires, we did not have any applicants of color. I do think, though, it's a great point, and I think, we should be more intentional if this sort of opening comes up in the future, to make sure that, just like with teachers, that we're advertising that way, that we're being just as aggressive when it comes to administrators, because it's been talked about in the chat. One of the challenges is salary. Well, certainly administrative positions come with a greater salary, a greater incentive to move. So there's at least a chance, although, often folks are a little later in life and maybe less willing to move because, they are settled. But I think it's a good point. So thank you.
And I think it's important that you use the word intentional. I think both school districts will have to be intentional about hiring educators of color. Otherwise, you're doomed.
Yeah, I agree completely. We can't simply post an ad and say we did it. We tried, right? So I agree.
Those were the only two questions in the chat, but audience members can raise their hands if they have other questions or put them in the chat. And we're down to 15 minutes now, 7:15. Questions are still welcome.
I'd like to ask Dr. Thompson, the brochures that you mentioned that are being used when you go on job fairs, are you using the brochures that the NAACP designed? Dr. Thompson?
Oh, he's muted.
He's muted.
Sorry, I apologize. Yes, those are the ones that I'm speaking to. And to be clear, obviously due to COVID, we haven't been out in person a lot in the last year or so. But we do have those, and that is certainly, yes, sir.
Okay, good. Also, Tim, you mentioned some HBCU. You mentioned 2 HBCUs that the school district had gone to. Are there any other HBCUs that you've gone to when you were able to go out on job fairs?
So those are 2 virtual job fairs. I don't believe any in-person ones are actually being held this year. And then we did reach out to all HBCUs in Virginia with both an email to the main coordinator person, as well as following up with with the brochures that you've mentioned. So
good.
Yeah, I do see one question in the chat about the makeup and scope of the division equity team. I'll let Rebecca Walters jump in if she wants. I can say that it includes, so myself and Tammy Dunn represent the school board. We've got the superintendent is on it. Both of our principals are on it. We have several teachers. We have former students, including students of color, and as well as faculty. So one faculty member who's on it is they're all great, but one had come from a school district that was significantly more diverse, and so she has certainly brought a lot to the committee as well. The scope of the work is essentially thinking about everything in the school system, from hiring to, as I say, implicit bias, interactions of teachers within the classroom, curriculum, sort of all these different issues. Where obviously we can't tackle everything at once, but both gathering information and then making explicit plans for how to take action.
Reginald, I think Al has a question.
Yes.
Al,
did you have a question or comment?
No, but Maria does.
I do. I thought I put it in the comments, but it's, maybe you don't see it. But Marilyn had mentioned about some time ago growing your own, and it brought to mind the Ed and Margaret Walker Scholarship. Are you familiar with that? Anyone? Yes? No?
yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So this is working within the high school to get students to go to the HBCU, but it starts in elementary school to get them in that mindset to want to stay in education. And you know, if students aren't given that idea, that incentive early, they won't go into it. And I remember when I graduated from Lexington High School, my counselor, whoever it was, I don't remember, I never heard her suggest to me what college you want to go to, or what do you want to do when you graduate. I was never given that opportunity, and I didn't think about it. So I think right after I graduated, I stayed here in Lexington, but I got married, you know, and then eventually, after all my children are grown, I came back, take care of my mother, and I'm living in the house that I grew up in. but I did go into education, and through Virginia Tech. And this has been years ago. I'm retired. I think it's almost 20 years now. And I think that it has to be started early, that incentive. So that's why I put it in there about the Margaret and Ed and Margaret Walker scholarship.
Could I,
Okay.
sorry, could I also add something about that exact
Yes.
point in regard to how the school could implement something like that? I'm sorry, I can't use my camera right now, but can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Oh, in regard to how we can implement something like that, I think it's hard to persuade someone in this community where to go 18 years down the line. But if you have this perspective in which you're talking to them about what they're expecting from themselves as they're moving through the school system, you can help guide them in a way that can get them towards this scholarship. So you have 5-year-olds who may not be able to get this Black educator or this educator of color right now, but you're trying to help them see something in 18 years down the line when they can go to an HBCU and they can get that experience. How can you convince them of that now? Well, you see what they're working with in their day-to-day settings, what they're missing in their classrooms. Once you open that discussion, you've now created a bridgeway, and you can present these ideas, not saying, oh, in 18 years you're going to an HBCU, but in 18 years you're possibly going somewhere where you're getting something that we may not be providing at this very moment. We're working our best in this community to provide, but in the long run, this is also somewhere else that has plenty of opportunities for someone like you. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Byron. Tenny, I see your hand.
Yes, one thing I was thinking about that maybe the schools could do is that in the realm of intentionality is have, front and center diversity statements, the value of diversity statements on their websites. They could do their Instagram page and their Facebook page and say, we're looking for teachers of color and we're offering a signing bonus, and so sort of like a blitz, so that social media is huge in the way we can recruit. And so it can reach Harrisonburg, where Philip Thompson went to college, and it can reach, I don't know, all kinds of places. That's the one thing I wanted to say. And the second thing is, it's so great that there were 78 people on this call, and the school board members are on this call. But I think talking about what we can do, it can't be that way. It can't say the problems that exist everywhere. But the fact that we've come together, it's very powerful. And so just to talk about things we can do, the community is changing. We have the Walker program, which is going to put in place Black and brown businesses downtown. It's going to be a diverse community, right? We have the NAACP, which we didn't have. And so there are all these sort of selling points. We have the Oak Grove Cemetery. And so there are all these selling points that we could maybe hire or ask a volunteer from Washington and Lee or VMI, who are good at advertising, to reach potential employees that way. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Good. And to piggyback on what Tenny said, Ellen, okay, go ahead, Ellen.
I was just going to read a question that Ellen put in the chat. I'm sorry to interrupt, Reverend Early. Do you want me to read Ellen's question first? Okay. Ellen asks, how can RCPS help to create a more welcoming community environment, especially in the schools themselves? Seems like a great first consideration. Be open to anybody to address.
Can you repeat that, Anna? I'm sorry.
Sure. Yes. How can RCPS help to create a more welcoming community environment, especially in the schools themselves?
And who is that directed to? The school, the school personnel who are on the panel?
It sounds like it would, but I think yes, Ellen, would you like to expand on your question?
Hi, sure, I'd be happy to. Mostly I'm thinking specifically about other initiatives that we've, I think, been talking about now over a couple years. One is implementing an anti-racist curriculum in the school systems. And I think some really nice steps have been taken, and I'd love to hear what future steps are planned. And then the second is the question of the prohibition of Confederate symbols in the dress code, that I think would send the right message to all students, to all current faculty and staff, and to future potential job applicants, that this is a welcoming community. So really my question is, what are the steps that can be taken to advance in the sort of cultural realm that makes a community a welcoming place to be a job applicant?
Sure. So with respect to, the race curriculum and those sorts of things, those are things that we'll talk about with respect to our equity initiative. How are we going to implement that? I think the new standards coming out from the history and social studies group that are now, that Mr. Wilson was talking about, they're still taking remarks through March 1. And the Department of Education, the Board of Education at the state level is going to continue to push some of those things down to us for us to consider and for us to implement. I've seen some of those changes, and they're pretty significant, and they're long overdue. With respect to the Confederate symbols, that's one of those things that we've got an extremely diverse community, and some people feel very strongly about that, one on both sides of it. And at the end of the day, we are still right now with case law and the way it's working with the First Amendment. It's a sticky subject with respect to if you start restricting those types of things that students and faculty can or cannot wear. It's what do you restrict next? What do you not restrict? So I'm not saying it can't be done. I'm just saying it's not as cut and dry as what a lot of people like to make it seem. And it's one of those things that it's not going to happen overnight, unfortunately.
All right. Are there any other questions? Thank you, Dr. Thompson. Any other questions? Anna, I can't see.
I have one question. I think that when we start thinking teachers, if we simply think teachers, if we think in terms of role models, for instance, years ago, a fellow by the name of Chip Schramm, very good friend of mine, worked with the Rotaract Club at Rockbridge County High School. He was not a teacher, but he was a role model. And role models don't necessarily have to be on the payroll of the school system, but they can come in and help with students. They can be club advisors. They can be advisors to organizations and groups within the school community. Those individuals, there are retired school teachers out there. Those individuals can be tapped to come in on a volunteer basis, if you like, or on a part-time basis, if you like. But if we think teachers, I think we're putting up a wall. But if we open it up to individuals who can set a positive example for our students, I think we can open up this and look at it a much broader spectrum.
Thank you, sir. Any other questions, Anna?
No, I don't see any other questions in the chat.
All right, I wanted to piggyback on what Tenny had said about the highlighting the diversity that is and the changes that have taken place in Lexington. I've been here for 5.5 years, and prior to that time, there were no organizations like the Latino or events taking place like the Latino Festival, the Pride Festival, the Juneteenth celebration, and the MLK Community Parade. All of these are diverse events and activities that have come into play over the past 5.5 years, all of which highlight the diversity that is now Lexington, Virginia. And I think Tenny said that needs to be preached, that needs to be highlighted, that needs to be emphasized so that people of color can come and see that things have changed in Lexington in over the short time of 5.5 years. Organizations like 50 Ways Rockbridge and Care Rockbridge. So I would agree with her 110% in emphasizing these events over Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. All right. If there are no other questions, comments, we want to thank you so much for coming out this evening, joining us. We want to thank our panelists for their magnificent presentations that they gave. And we want to hear a call to action that will be given by Tenny Sand. Tenny, are you there?
Well, I think everybody already heard my call to action, but just, one of the ways to change minds is to one community member at a time. And so you can talk to members in your church, you can talk to people on your book group, you can talk to people you go out and have drinks with, well, maybe on Zoom, and talk this up. Right? Talk up the fact that we are a diverse community, we're growing to a diverse community, and we want a diverse workforce in the schools, educators of color. And I think that's how we change minds. And that's how we can also spread the word. And so that's my call to action this evening. Thank you, everybody. This was great. Thank you.
Thank you again, everybody. 7:31, and we did it in an hour and a half. Very, very good. God bless. Good night, and stay safe.
Have a wonderful evening, everybody.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Were you able to get any of the
Thank you all. Good night.
Thank you, Hallie.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hey, come back and teach here, huh?
Aaron,
Eric,
Hyler, thank you so very much.
I will send
you,
you
Al.
the link for that recording tomorrow if you want to post it on the Historical Society website.
That'd be great. I
Okay.
appreciate that. And I can then put out to our community, the other groups too. That's a good point, Guarding.